and more points of view. So, and at the same time, so these might be positive things, but there's also more confusion, obviously. When you have more people talking about things, trying to figure things out, there are going to be different points of view. And so we've seen that, right? In the past 2 centuries, there's been a lot of debate, and it continues. And so handling that for a tradition is a challenge, but it can be a positive challenge, provided that we have a robust um, forum and fora of discussion where we can conduct these sort of discussions um, with knowledge, right? And I think that is where libraries come in. They are still repositories of information and discourse. Libraries are still at the forefront of access to critically vetted information. That's important, especially in these days. There is a lot of junk out there. I don't need to tell anybody. Uh, I mean, at our library, at our university, we have to tell students why it is not okay to just Google something. Um, because the search and Google is getting better, and Google Scholar is a different thing. But if you just search for something, who made the pyramids, you're also going to get, websites that say the pyramids were created by aliens. I don't think any academic, you know, um, context would accept that, right? So the equivalent of that in Islamic discourse is out there. Um, and so how do we counteract that, right? If you have a whole lot of voices, some based on solid scholarship, some not, some having ulterior motives, some just being silly, how do we differentiate that? And how do we make space for an intellectual discourse that is based on tradition, that's based on solid scholarship, and is serious, right? And it's useful for the people who are engaged in it. It's not just a yelling match or one-upmanship or whatever you have. You see a lot of trolling and all sorts of other things online. So that's a contemporary challenge. When the community of scholars was smaller, it was more easily manageable. The ulama across the board had certain other about debate, and so how do we translate that in our times? That's the challenge. And like I said, it's not this is not unique to the Islamic tradition. Even secular academic circles, this is a concern. How to combat false news, false rumors, things like that. Wrong, um, one of the challenges is um, publishers who just put out stuff which is low quality, which is not peer reviewed. So libraries spend thousands of dollars on uh, providing access to journals that are peer reviewed. So what is peer reviewed? Peer reviewed is where scholars vet other scholars' output to make sure that there's a certain standard, right? You don't, when you're talking about who created the pyramids, you don't talk about aliens because that's not a theory that is creditable, right? And so you have similar things in the Islamic tradition, contemporary Islamic tradition, and so we have to handle that. If we don't, then it becomes a free for all, right? And then where is the scholarly academic discussion? So that is where the libraries are playing an increasing role. Contemporary libraries are also much more than books. So there's a tendency to think that libraries are collections of books, but now again, because of technological developments, we have to sort of move beyond that. Libraries are archives of the past, present, and they anticipate and create the future just because of their engagement with the intellectual tradition. They make knowledge and information accessible to many. And for that to be successful, it has to be a collective endeavor. Among librarians, among academic institutions, nobody can do it. There's so much information out there. No one institution can do it alone. So as we are moving forward with this technology, mashallah, you can see we are talking online and in person and, in several time zones. And as this happens, um, and as more and more information and interaction happens, we have to do this collectively. That's one thing I really want to bring to people's attention. And it goes hand in hand so with other institutions. So where you have madaris, mashallah, that are coming up in North America, I think madaris also have to be aware that their activity is intimately connected with storing and providing knowledge and access to knowledge, which is what a library does. The library today is not just books. That's the easy part, especially for the big classics that everybody is going to use. But if you want to create a good collection that represents the tradition in the past and the tradition as it is in the present, and to document it for the future, you have to pay attention to libraries, both print, in the form of print, and in the form of the digital technologies that are coming up. Again, it is a lot of effort. It is a lot of demands a lot of resources, and just because of the nature of the diversity of the tradition, uh, it demands collective action. So I would say, if we are serious about um, promoting knowledge and storing it, preserving it, and then disseminating it in a responsible manner, then the scholars have to pay attention to this aspect of the activity. It's intimately linked. Um, so books are just one part. As you know, books get written, but before they get written, the ideas are discussed in journals, at least in modern scholarship, right? And increasingly, um, in Islamic circles, you also have journals. You know, most of the major madaris in the Islamic world have journals in which ideas are discussed. I think that is something that we have to probably start here in the United States. Um, I think it would be great if you could start as digital journals, but regardless, it's the same criterion: peer-reviewed, vetted journals that produce good scholarship. Whether it's the American Journal of Hanafi Fiqh, or you know the Journal of Maliki Scholars, or whatever you have it, it is scholars who are creating these platforms. That's what journals are, of discussion and discourse, where new ideas are shared, where new ideas are discussed. Some are discarded, some are not, and then that sort of creates further scholarship. That is where the discourse and the discussion is happening. Going forward, that is going to be important. We also have to keep in mind, I mean, North America, mashallah, the community is taking root, but it's a small community, it's a small part of the Ummah, and we cannot ignore the Islamic world. So that means we have to engage with the discourse in the journals and outside journals within the larger Ummah, right? We need access to that. How does that happen? That happens through libraries. So that is a very important aspect that I think we need to pay attention to. Create our own journals, but also read and make available journals that are already being printed in all formats. There are other electronic resources. Most reference resources are now going digital. And Islamic resources, some of them are not. It would be great to sort of put the Fatawa Compedia that are so important for fiqh studies, have a digital repository of them. It sounds like a great idea, but it's a lot of hard work, a lot of resources again, and it is a huge, huge task, and it has to be done collectively. And we have to keep in mind, digital is not free, digital is not easy, and we still need to address space. So you're talking about disk space versus shelf space, but both require ongoing commitment to funding and expense and costs. So we have to keep that in mind when we plan these things. And so one thing is that already scholars are using digital resources that are available. So why do we need to take this effort? Why am I bringing it to everybody's attention? Are not academic libraries, secular libraries already doing a great job? And I would say yes, they definitely are. I'm every week I'm humbled by the efforts that my colleagues at my institution and other institutions that they put into making knowledge available, of all sorts of knowledge available to as many people as they can. There are initiatives for open access. There's initiatives to digitize as much as we can and share our collections with the whole world. So I'm not suggesting that Muslims take this initiative because there are plots against Islam or Islamic knowledge. No. Um, But despite that, um, there is the usual constraint of point of view and scope that determines budget allocations. You know, if you have a focus for an Islamic collection, it's going to turn out differently than if you have a focus for a secular academic library. It's not a nefarious plot. It's just that you are doing different things, you are engaged in different activities, and that's going to reflect in what results, right? um, and so you have questions of where to focus, what to focus on, and what community are you catering to, right? And that is going to decide what you are going to collect on. And so the question is, who's preserving the contemporary Muslim discourse and why? Right? Why are we being parasitic that instead of taking the initiative, we are depending upon other streams of knowledge? We are depending upon chance discoveries on the internet uh, to meet our needs. And how long is that going to go on? And what's the result of that? So it's like you get something on the internet and you're fine, you're happy, you've got the text you're looking for, and you move on. But that's a very short-sighted way of looking at things. You have to sort of plan, because if you're going digital, then you should sort of plan that environment and be in control of it. If there is a Muslim discourse, and I would say there's been, mashallah, for 1400 years, and it's getting more complicated and it's more diverse, then Muslims should take charge of it. And that means putting the effort, in creating a structure, creating a community that is taking care of the needs and is taking care of the standards and is allowing the discourse to prosper, right? Nobody is going to do it for us. Um, so who's preserving the contemporary American Muslim discourse, for example? Not just for the global Muslim discourse, but even if you focus it here in the United States, who is doing that? Um, who's documenting Muslim lives, Muslim developments? A few years ago, there was a book written by an African American gentleman who was, which basically was trying to show that Rasulullah Sallam was of black origin. Uh, Historically, it might not be um, feasible, but it's an interesting idea. And to me personally, it shows that Islam has taken root in America, especially among the African American community, because you find similar attempts at assimilating Islam in other areas, right? In South Asia, where I'm from, people sort of create lineages where they say, oh yes, our ancestors came from Arabia, or we are descendants of this. There's this whole way of sort of internalizing Islam, and I interpret this book as a very positive symptom of Islam is now here. It's America's home to Islam. Um, I recently learned that uh, you know in the 1970s, the African American community in the Bronx, or somewhere in New York, I think, created a special pie, a navy bean pie. I don't know if any of you have tried it. I have tried it. It's very delicious, dangerously so, because it's very rich in calories. And this was done by African American bakers to generate income for Muslim causes. So so we already have a culture, not just scholarly tradition, but we also have this cultural traditions that are taking root. And so are we aware of this? Are we, is anybody paying attention to this? I think it should be Muslims who are doing this, because this is our history, right? And so where does one preserve this? Where does one publish on Muslim matters? Who reads these publications? Who has access to it? We talk about, if we are concerned about the younger generation and their interest in Islam, then we have to create fora for them, right? With solid knowledge, not whatever is available on the internet, because that does a lot of damage. We don't need to, I don't need to convince you of that. So at the national level, these are the questions. These are the same questions on a global Muslim level. What are the global platforms of knowledge and exchange of knowledge? How do these limitations constraint our understanding and discourse of what contemporary Islam is and what future Islam is going to be like. Because what we do right now is going to determine what the future is going to be. What our intellectual ancestors decided to preserve in manuscript form and carry it forward is what we have received. And so what are we doing right now for the future? So these are some of the questions I wanted to bring up. One last thing is that libraries are increasingly at the forefront of open access publishing, uh, because as I said, digital production is expensive. There are paywalls. That's why you have to, libraries have to put paywalls, which goes against the grain of the way librarians are trained, especially in the United States. It has one of the most open library systems, where the ethic is to share information and make it available to people. But we have to do it because commercial vendors have put in the effort and the resources to make these things available. And so libraries are stepping in now and trying to do open access publishing. I think that is a very key thing that Muslim institutions have to keep in mind already, as they start, that part of their ethos should be to make, as it has always been, to make knowledge available, and the means to do that is through open access publishing, which is often carried out through libraries. So these are some of the major issues that I've been thinking about, and I would love to share your input about these. So let's talk. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Adnan. So we'll open the space for questions, so please let us know. In the meanwhile, I would like to point one or two comments. And I found it interesting that you talked about libraries as a part of the remedy for what we notice now as a contempt for expertise and specializations, especially in the humanities. Because in the name of, let's say, democracy, everyone is supposed to have an opinion, even in a specialty. That's obviously a very dangerous thing. And so if you can elaborate on that point, please do.
Well, I'm not a humanities professor, so I will, try. This is my personal opinion. I would say everybody has an opinion, and there's no harm in listening to the opinion. It's what do you do with that? If you engage in a reasoned debate calmly, then people who have better knowledge can show that, they can convince that. If it's an ad hominem argument is if it's emotional, then it's not a debate at all. But if we all have our opinions, but the whole point of scholarship and discourse is to question our opinions and to form better ones. And so if we are serious about that, then we can have ordinary people. Like right now, you asked me a question about humanities, and as an ordinary person, I'm trying to address that. This is my opinion. I might be wrong, but if we engage in a discourse and a debate, then I can be educated, or maybe I can convince you, and then we can go forward. I think that's perhaps, especially in an American context, that is the tradition of rational debate, and that is, I think, still going on. Trying to close the debate abruptly by saying, "Oh, well, you don't know, I'm an expert," doesn't sit well. Even if it has merit, I think the greatest ulama have always come down to the level of the people they're talking to and try to convince them through ilm. And that happens even in the humanities. You have young students who come into class. They're dealing with classical texts, Plato, Aristotle, other people who've been studied for centuries. And it's very refreshing. I mean, when I do library reference consultations. Some of the papers, and these are undergraduate students who come up for research, and they're writing a 10-page paper, but the idea is so interesting. And so I learn a lot. And I also have to sort of tone down the expectations and say it's just a 10-page paper. Your topic is better for a dissertation, PhD dissertation. That's a separate thing. But yeah, engaging. So you have opinion, that's fine, mashallah. You want to talk? Welcome. Let's talk. Let's tell you about ilm and what the Islamic tradition is. And then let's, build on it and educate ourselves. I think that can be a good way of sort of addressing this question. And I think this is part of the confusion. I mean, you read stuff on the internet, or you read a couple of books, and we've all, at least at some point in our life, have done that for some subject. Okay, well, I've read the 3 books that everybody talks about, so now I'm an expert. I'm afraid I'm guilty of that. But if you keep reading, you realize, oh no, it's a little more complicated. Or if you talk to somebody who is more erudite than you, then you realize, oh, there are other aspects of this. But the key is keep talking, keep searching, keep discussing, keep reading. And for that, you need resources, right? For that, you need to tell people that no, just reading 2 books, 3 books, just reading, just reading the 6 Sahah of Hadith does not make you a muhaddis. There is a lot of hard work. There's a lot of critical apparatus that goes there. And so if you're going to challenge somebody, then at least be aware of that tradition and the depth of that tradition. Same thing with anything else. So in that regard, I don't think it's a, if people are challenging the expertise of experts, that's fine. If they're real experts, it won't be a problem. I mean, they will meet the challenge and probably convince the other person. But keep talking.
Any other questions? The other point that I wanted to mention, which I also appreciate, that you are talking about libraries as part of the necessity of taking charge of our own heritage, or at least trying to lead the way in doing that. So I will invite you again if you can elaborate on that. Thank you.
So, like I said, I mean, a lot of stuff that is on the internet is related to the Islamic traditions is either by academic libraries in the West and increasingly in the Islamic world, national libraries, secular libraries of universities and all that, or it's individuals who are putting up stuff. And it's again haphazard. It's so right now it seems to me most of the Muslim use of the internet is sort of parasitic on the efforts and endeavors of other institutions, or it's just chance, But this is not systematic. If you have a program of, knowledge and dissemination of knowledge, then you have to be more systematic about it. You have to be more consistent about it, and it's you also have to be aware of what it means to put something online. It is like putting something on a shelf, but you're doing it online on somewhere in the cloud or something, but ultimately on a computer somewhere. And so there are costs involved with that. Somebody is paying for it, and so whoever is paying for it in the end has control over what is put up and how it's used and how it's accessed. And so if Muslims are serious about their intellectual tradition and want to take charge of it and sort of develop it independently, then they have to pay attention to the means that are required to do this. And so that's where I think we really need to put the effort. Mashallah, the community has sort of it's a relatively young community and so it has built its institutions, it's built its mosques, it has built its madrasas. Now it is building, its academic institutions, and this is a very serious and important part of it. So I think this is a good point in our trajectory right now, growth trajectory to talk about these things right now, because you can see that there is a need. There is, our younger generation is interested in the knowledge, or if they're not, then this is the way to prepare the ground for anybody who comes and is seeking knowledge. And it's also to prepare the ground for a modern intellectual discourse about Islam, nationally, globally, among Muslims, among ulama, because this is the new way of communication. And if we are going to be independent, and if you're going to be conscious, self-reflexive about it, then we have to take charge of it, right? And this is the basis on which you can share books, you can share journals, you can share opinions, whatever. I mean, but it has to be in Muslim hands. Um, just the way the library collection, if it is related to a Muslim institution, has to be in Muslim hands. Otherwise, you are dependent upon other people's point of view. If it meshes with your needs, well and good, alhamdulillah. If it doesn't, then what are you going to do, right? It doesn't pay to be parasitic. It doesn't pay to be dependent. Um, if you are serious about your tradition or your intellectual endeavors, then you have to take care of the means as well.
Thank you. Any questions?
Assalamu alaikum. Okay, so I think you partly answered the question that I had on my mind, and but I still want to push against it initially and see where we go. So you had kind of, I felt, idealized the kind of academic secular library in the university as a place that has control systems. So you gave the example of peer review as a type of control from free-for-all publication. Okay, so I acknowledge that. But libraries end up, even the ones that are in private universities that have private endowments, they still end up having such a large repertoire of publication that it almost appears as if it's a type of free-for-all, meaning there's almost every type of possible publication within, say, the New York Public Library, or, say, a private university or public university. And so I guess my question first is, what are really the controls? Not say in a journal, but in what gets allowed into a library. Or is it merely that the current political drama around, say, all lives matter or gay rights matter, that certain libraries will promote due to, say, who's on their board, what their political or apolitical or religious leanings, whatever they might be, what gets moved to the front, what gets shifted to the periphery. So there's clearly power involved in the making of a library, but there's also endless growth that libraries can continue to publish and publish, and especially for a student, it can appear very daunting to walk into a library and think, where do I begin? What questions do I start with? And so I think the way you just addressed us taking ownership of our own library so that we can develop our own questions, our own problems, and find more critical ways of addressing it, I think partly answers that. But I want to push you more on about the type of control within these secular academic libraries, and what type of controls might we need to have in our own?
I would say for secular academic libraries, and this is what I was trying to get at by saying, they have a certain point of view. The point of view is, so a secular academic library is catering to the STEM sciences, is catering to humanities, is catering to social sciences. So many of the books are for that. If you are interested in sociology of gender relations, then you have to pay attention to gender relation and its manifestations, not just overt political or theoretical things, but also how gender relations are played out in popular media. right? So what might seem to be from one perspective as frivolous popular culture is important because it's creating the understanding of gender or anything else within the mass society, right? So it might seem like why do libraries? So my collection has Bollywood films. um, is that academic? I would say yes, it's academic. You can see the evolution of South Asian societies, especially middle class attitudes and so many other things, through Bollywood films. Uh, Personally, and I'm sorry, I'm sure all my South Asian friends are going to hate me for this. I can't sit through a Bollywood film anymore. Maybe I've spent too much time in the U.S. I also have trouble with Hollywood films, most of them, but maybe I'm an old desi uncle. But I appreciate that there are scholars who do very serious work on Bollywood, on Hollywood, and other things, because film is a very important, critical uh, medium, right? So that's what I meant, that academic secular libraries are, they are catering to a lot of needs. They are not just catering. So even if they pick up Islamic books or things, it's in that context. It's in the context of their focus. And so the libraries basically follow whatever the academic forces is in the academy, in the university, right? Um, Talking about big collections, South Asia is so India is the second largest country in the world in terms of population. If you include Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, this region is the largest chunk of humanity. You have every major world faith. There's a Hindi proverb saying, char kos pe pani badle, aat kos pe bani. Every 4 miles the water changes, every 8 miles the language, right? And so how are you going to how many India has what, how many, 20 national languages, 12 or 20, something like that, right? And then many regional languages. There's this whole debate about dialect versus language. And so is Seraiki a separate language? Is it a dialect of Punjabi? How come half of Sindh understands it? um, and so I can't do all of it. Even if my dreams come true and the library budget 50% is devoted to the South Asia collection, I still can't do it. I need help, and I have to focus it. Uh, and for there, I pay attention to what the scholars at Berkeley are doing for South Asia, and that informs my collection. So again, it's a point of view. This is what I meant by point of view. What your scholarly interests are. If your scholarly interests are in humbly fiqh at your madrasa, go ahead, please create a wonderful collection on fiqh from the humbly point of view, and all the auxiliary sciences and all the scholarship there, so that people know that, oh yeah, that madrasa is where, if you're interested in humbly fiqh, that's where you go. And the ulama know that they have the journals, they have the books. So if you're interested in some masala that you want to look at from the humbly point of view, those are the folks you go to, that's the library you go to, right? This is how you do it. And so that's what I meant, that is your point of view. Now, your academic interests are going to control, and this is a tussle. These are that's why I kept talking about resources, because this is not cheap, right? If you're buying this stuff, you're not buying that stuff. If you're spending money on the library, you're not spending money on more comfortable chairs for students, and which is maybe good, they'll stay awake in class. So this is so there are constraints already. And then there's the outlook of intellectual traditions, or um, do I foresee that there will be some madrasa collection in America which will also have postmodern American Muslim points of view in it? At some point, maybe, and maybe it's not a bad thing depending upon the context. If people are engaging with it critically, or they are trying to understand it. Again, I personally don't think diversity, maybe it's because I've spent my professional career in a major academic university. Diversity does not scare me. It's how you engage with it. And it makes you comfortable then to engage with the larger society with confidence. um, it's all right. You can disagree, and you can still be yourself, and you can still have respect for the other point of view.
The question from an online viewer, Maulana Kamil asks, do you think Muslims should invest in libraries the way we do for masajid?
I would say yes. And I would also add that, of course, there is a hierarchy of investment. Like I said, mashallah, we have built our masajid. We have built our schools. We have built, this is an ongoing thing. This shows you that, again, the community taking root. And so I think this, like I said, this is a good time to start this particular discussion about libraries and systems of access to knowledge and preservation of knowledge, because now we are building madrasas. And I want to point out that in the United States especially, but also all over the world, that traditional model of a madrasa where you have just books, a small library, and the ulama, mashallah, have it in their minds, and that we have to complement that. Complement with the E, right? With modern technology, with catering to this hyper-connected society, which is going to get more hyper-connected. And we have to be aware of the challenges. But yes, this is a need. This is already here with us, with our younger generation. If they're Googling stuff, or if they're used to, I mean, I still with students at my library, they're so used to clicking a button, and hey presto, there's the article. And then when I tell them most of the South Asia journals are not even indexed, you have to go to the stacks and pull something out, their eyes glaze over. It's like, so but that's their reality, right? And we have to sort of anticipate that and meet that. And like I try to show, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's it can be very conducive to the Islamic systems of knowledge, and it can lead to another flowering of the Islamic discourses. Provided we are careful and we take charge, and we do it right. It's very easy to mess up as well, but the information is out there, right? All sorts of information is out there. So how do you provide the right sort of information? And what does it mean to provide the right sort of information, right? That's the debate that we have to start now.
So books are already known to be an essential part of a library. So when it comes to digital libraries,
Audio and video is definitely a new dimension to it. We have like this discussion, for example. I mean, I'm speaking, there's not great intellectual merit to it, but it's a start of a discussion, right? But when you have lectures of ulama or bayans of ulama, or so much is happening. Again, that's interesting, because a lot of the information is now available through YouTube lectures and speeches and khutbahs, and you find compilations of khutbahs and speeches, but then you also have you can also do that in an audiovisual way, which sort of gives a new layer. You can see, you can also record the non-verbal communication, or the emotional tone, the rhetoric, how it is played. There's a performance element to it. It's a more interesting way of preserving khutbahs or speeches, for example, than just the dry text, right? So audiovisual is important. There are other formats with that, right? Things that are born digital. That's another major challenge for libraries, and they are spending, web crawlers to record websites and things like that. Um, that is another important source. Uh, there are things that people are creating online and they just stay online. They never see print, and yet they are also important. And I think that that's going to become important again. So how do you preserve that? So a book is relatively easy. You take it and put it on a shelf. What do you do with audiovisual stuff? What do you do with born digital? How do you preserve it? Digital technologies so far are, they become obsolete very quickly. So that's another expense. In that regard, books have been wonderful. I mean, you take a 1,000-year-old manuscript, it's still there. I mean, you still have to like put it on a shelf and that's it. Well, I mean, you want to put it in a controlled environment and preserve it properly now in modern times, but it's relatively easier. So that's a great point. I mean, that's another thing. I mean, people think digitalization is it's a savior, and it'll cut costs and it's so convenient, and you have your little USB drive and you have everything on it. Yeah, sure, but when you start doing a serious collection and start preserving it in the right way, then this becomes very serious and complicated very quickly. And it also has the same challenges of choosing what to keep, what not to keep. Even with print, there's more produced on Islam in Urdu than any other language. A lot of it is absolute junk. And by that I mean, it's like polemical pamphlets, which sometimes are, of course, useful in their own right. A lot of it is just general, prayer manuals, or let us learn to do salat. How many of those are you going to collect? So from a librarian's point of view, there's not value in it. So the challenge is, whether it's books, whether it's anything, is to select what is, and then again, you have to have some intellectual background and knowledge of it. Will this be useful today and then tomorrow and 20 years from now? And maybe that can change, but you are always selecting. You can never take everything. I mean, otherwise, it's impossible. And AV stuff is the same way, So, but yes, it is an important medium.
Well, since there is no more questions, I will ask a small question, inshallah. So, how do you see building a library as, especially in our context, as a brick, perhaps in the bridge that might somehow connect academia and let's say academia and madrasa?
I think, again, I talked about the division of labor. If we create Islamic collections that have a lot of depth in them, that has a lot of rare material, then scholars in the secular academy will also be interested. Scholars are interested in knowing where things are when they need them and how to access them. And like I talked about the division of labor, there's, well, we know this madrasa is, and everybody's an expert on, their collection is concentrated on Hanbali fiqh or Hanafi fiqh or whatever. Once you have those depths and you have these specialized collections and you make them accessible, then it is an automatic bridge, a natural bridge between people who are interested in that, whether they come from a secular academic background or whether they come from an Islamic academic background. If you open up, if you build something and you open it up and make it accessible, those connections happen automatically, right? And so that's so I would say it is, if we start to do this as only to cater to the needs of the Muslim community, we are in automatically also catering to the needs of the larger academic community or scholarly community that goes beyond Muslims. And because the Islamic tradition is part of the human experience, And if we do a good job of preserving it, we are preserving a part of the human experience. And anybody who's interested in it then has access to it. And hopefully that other traditions are doing that. And so the human experience is, preserved, or at least the best part of it is preserved and is carried on. So if we do our job well, we naturally build bridges within the community and outside the community.
Another question from an online viewer. You talked about complementing our traditional libraries in madrasas. Could you elaborate on that? Are there steps Muslim centers should be taking now?
Yes, I mean, that's what I've tried to elaborate, in the sense that we have to be serious about building library collections. And by library collections, I mean books and journals and other media, audiovisual and things, in print format, but also digital format, and being self-reflexive about that, and sort of making things, making resources available and putting effort in it and commitment in it, so that we can sort of take the tradition forward, preserve it, build on it, and then pass it on.
Well, we thank our Adnan Malik for coming all the way from California to visit us. And we also thank you for your efforts in your help with building the Darul Qasim Library. Thank you very much. And سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Jazakumullah.